and we hand him off to the nurse at the door. At this point, it's during the whole peak COVID bullshit, so I'm with him, and mother's aside because only one parent was allowed in there with him. And he is being tested on, and he's going through, the blood panel, all this, the things that would be done if any infant at his age would go in with unknown conditions. At that point, he had a low glucose level, which means that he had no sugar in his body. Now, referencing that in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, that's an adrenal problem, that's a sugar metabolism issue. So, at this point, he's being checked on, and they started administering medication to him without our consent. And then once we get the report, I'm like, whoa. Why is he being given these medications? Oh, well, he has to because of these conditions. I said, well, we didn't approve any of that. At this point, it's still, there's no signs of interference from CPS. So they give him a glucose shot, which is basically just sugar and through an IV. And his awareness starts to come to surface. He starts to wake up a little bit more. And because he was only 10 months at the time, he was transferred to a children's hospital. When he was transferred to the children's hospital, that's when everything went sideways. Within 2 hours, 3 hours, the doctor that was overseeing him had contacted CPS, and the CPS medical director now became his primary physician overseeing him. And within 5 hours, they diagnosed him with severely malnourished. They diagnosed him with a protein deficiency. They diagnosed him with metabolic acidosis. And the conclusion that doctor said was that he had to start, this baby had to start because of his size. So they detained him at the hospital. And they removed our visitations from seeing him. That lasted for a few days until we had to go to court. We went to court, and again, no literacy, no knowledge of the process itself. All we knew is that they took our baby away, they accused us of starving him, and we couldn't see him. That's all that was processing in my head. That same evening, CPS comes, they interview me, they interview mom, they interview brothers, and this was my first introduction to a CPS investigator. Mind you, when they came, I didn't engage with them. I was always mother. Real basic, simple conversation. So it was real simple. However, this investigation, this is where I started to understand what CPS actually does when they do these investigations. And what they do is they manufacture evidence. They try to make you be the worst possible parent on paper as possible. And they try to pull out any information they can to make it look as if you were doing so much harm and there's no other option but to take the kid from you. So, as I said, we go to the first court hearing, and they put an attorney on to us. I didn't want an attorney. They said, well, it doesn't matter if you want an attorney or not. We're going to give you one. But what does the attorney do? Oh, we submit to everything that they said, all of the allegations that CPS said in the reports, we just submit, which means that we just allow it. We accept it. And they plead the fifth on our behalf, which means that we could not discuss any of this to the social workers because we now have the assistance of counsel and with an attorney. And then to make even matters worse was they put a no discussion order, which means that we couldn't talk about this to anybody, otherwise we would be fined and imprisoned if we decided to do that. Now at this time, like I said, I didn't know anything about the law. And because of that, I expanded on this. And I said, you know what? I'm going to learn how the hell this happened, why it happened, what do I got to do to fix it? Well, you jump down this rabbit hole, all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, these mother effers are getting paid for this. This is all a part of a scheme to take kids for federal and state funding with incentives. So the more kids you get, the more money they make. And this money is distributed between the county, between the attorneys, between the judges, between the clerks, all of the parties that are involved. They're doing this for this specific reason. Now I'm going to go ahead and play this. This video will...
But they were quite aware of what Mr. Trump wanted the department to do. Jeff Clark met privately with President Trump and others in the White House and agreed to assist the president without telling him.
Okay.
Supreme Court Justice of Kentucky is surveying judges across the state.
Yeah.
Within the child protection system.
You got two tabs up top open. Up top, there's two tabs open.
Spirit!
Thank you, dear Phyllis, and thank you.
Okay. Okay, so if you could just click on that. Yeah, this. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I?
The Chief Supreme Court Justice of Kentucky is surveying judges across the state to see if he should recommend opening up child protection courts.
Kentucky's one of 21 states that still close child protection proceedings, but there's a growing movement here to open them up after the Inspector General of Kentucky, in this report, documented widespread abuses within the child protection system. Tonight, we continue our 3-year-long investigation of Kentucky CPS.
Please welcome our good friend, Senator Nancy Schaefer. Thank you, dear Phyllis, and thank you to all of you. I have served in the Georgia State Senate for 4 years. One of my greatest pleasures.
So Nancy Schaefer was a Georgia State Senator who started to dive into CPS and expose them for what they're doing. As I would describe, they're making money off of this. She was sadly murdered. According to the news, her husband killed her and killed himself. Yeah.
Other than my sonogram bill was getting a resolution passed to stop the North American Union. However, for 4 years, I have been confronted with families struggling to remove their children from the clutches of Child Protective Services. I wrote a scathing report last year on the corruption in Child Protective Services, and an update and copies are out on the table. The Department of Child Protective Services has become a protected empire, built on taking children and separating families. This is not to say that there are not those children who do need to be removed from wretched situations and need protection. However, my report is concerned with the children and parents caught up in legal kidnapping. Having worked with probably 300 cases statewide and hundreds across the country, and in nearly every state, I am convinced there is no accountability in Child Protective Services. The adoption of the Safe Families Act set in motion first in 1974 by Walter Mondale, and later in 1997 by President Bill Clinton, offered cash bonuses to the states for every child they adopted out most year. Some counties often offer $4,000 to $6,000 bonus for each child adopted out to strangers, and an additional $2,000 for a special needs child. Employees work to keep the federal dollars flowing. The National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect in 1998 reported that 6 times more children died in foster care than in the general public. and that once removed to official safety, these children are far more likely to suffer abuse, including sexual molestation, than in the general population. Think what that number is today, 10 years later. Child Protective Services sees its children using the very system that is paid for by the taxpayer, who actually believes it is used to protect abused and neglected children. The bureaucracy of workers benefit financially by a system that converts children into cash while destroying their families and their lives.
And it's all driven by money. All of the taking of the children that's going on right now.
Is Child Protective Services just an official government kidnapping ring?
Basically,
Okay, so I get introduced to this, and the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, I gotta research it myself. I gotta see it. And then I started to really dive into understanding how it's being processed and how the money is being, how the lucrative system is happening. Right there. And in order to resolve my issues, I had to fast track myself in the education of the law. Now, this information that's presented here, there's 25 points. These 25 points, I can very much with confidence express this, that you're not going to find a resource point that will have all of this information in one source, which, just for rainy days, if you want it, I can email it to you, that way you have it available to you. But I'll go through this, and at the end, when we have questions and whatnot, we can discuss this. But I kind of want to just give you the information, that way it's available to you to have. Number one, CPS removes kids and receives funding for this process. County agencies access state, which is 42 USC 672, and federal funding under Title 40 of the Social Security Act, and Adoption and Safe Families Act, which also have incentives for removing children and placing them in adoption programs. These are private businesses doing business with other private businesses. It's all about the money. This has nothing to do with the merits of the case. The National Council of Juvenile Family Court Judges is a private membership association handling abuse and neglect proceedings and receives federal funding money which pays off the judges, attorneys, guardian ad litem, clerks, and all parties involved in these proceedings. It's an operating as a business. These CPS courts are private, closed administrative tribunals mimicking judicial process. Now, this is the part where you go to a court hearing, you go to a traffic court, you go to any court basically in the United States, and you think it's a judicial process. However, it is not. And this is where we go to number 6, which is no right to trial by jury, which a right to trial by jury is a part of our Constitution. And in any matters dealing with anything, we have the right to be adjudicated by the jury of our peers. And in this case, you're not. In juvenile court, you are not given a trial by jury. You have a bench officer, which is basically the judge determines whether or not you keep your kids, whether or not you have to pay this fine, whether or not you go to jail. That's all determined off of a judicial officer or a judge or administrative officer, I would describe it as. So that means that there's no due process of law. As I mentioned, all parties involved in this private, for-profit business are making money. Now, let's go back to Journey's situation. He was taken by the medical director at this children's hospital. Now, what would be her incentive to having CPS involved? They too are getting paid for this. They have grants that are contracted with these agencies that are associated with these federal funds, which ultimately lead to them getting money for incentives on their behalf. Now, on paper, it doesn't say that, of course. They receive it as grants and donations. But I mean, this is the part again where this whole system is just completely blacked out. Now, original legislation intent in the Social Security Act of 1935, this is when essentially the whole idea for social services came to enactment in the states. This was a part of the general provisions, which states in 1101D that no federal official or agent can take your child over in objection of any of the parents. Now, this was legislation's original intent, which means that before the federal funding became accessible to the public or the state actors, they didn't necessarily have these incentive programs yet. So parents that were being investigated or CPS would get involved, they were being investigated for serious heinous crimes. These kids that are really being abused and neglected, and that would they would intervene on their behalf. However, when the incentive process came in a little bit later, it started to change the dynamics of, well, if we just take more kids, then we're getting more money. So that became the forefront of the whole process that they had bastardized. There does not need to be proven any facts to have your kids removed. The hearings you partake in are governed under a different set of rules and procedure. It is not the business of finding fault or guilt. Now, this part was a little bit confusing because you would think that you go to court, you're going to be tried either by a jury of your peers or a bench officer, and they're trying to determine whether you're guilty or you're innocent. People provide both sides of the evidence and they determine, okay, well, there's evidence that says that this person's innocent or evidence that says this person's guilty. That's irrelevant in these administrative courts. And that's not me saying this. Again, I'll provide you with all the research that I've done to support this. What their job is to do is to get it pushed on to the next hearing, because they're getting paid for all of this. For each hearing, they're getting paid. So, signing any document, safety plans, is creating a contract with this agency. When you get involved with CPS, they give you safety plans. They want you here, sign these documents, and we're going to get your kids back right away. That's a trap. They're trying to trap you. It's fraud, yes, but it's been happening for so long that we just don't recognize it. We don't know it. We don't know any better. The usage of child, parent, person, individual are all legal word traps. A child, a parent, a person, individual. Now, you would think that, well, a child is just a kid, right? A person is a person that we're here. An individual, you're an individual, I'm an individual. However, if you look at the legal definitions of these words, it's not that. A person is not even a man or a woman, it's a legal entity. So this is the part, again, they have these ways of entrapping us that we just are not aware of. The WIC code uses code to create parameters to claim your child as a dependent of the state. The Welfare Institution Code, every state has their own version of it. It's not labeled the same in each state. But basically, what this says is, okay, you're a child, which falls under the parameters of if a kid comes into the court system, they're now considered a child. When you start to understand the terminology, you reference your offspring, your offspring, your son or your daughter. You never want to use their words, child, parents, those are all word traps. And number 14 concludes with removing and taking kids by trickery, and most law enforcement, sheriffs, attorney generals of your state are a part of this lucrative money-making scam, knowingly or unknowingly. Now, I say this because I've had interactions with police departments, sheriff's departments in multiple counties, attorney general. I've reached out to our Congress, our legislative branch, and all of them just say, oh, well, we don't have any jurisdiction to help you. We can't, because they can't help us is because this is a private business. If someone has a PMA, the government can't come and interfere with that. That's why it's suggested that if you're starting a business, you want to put it in the PMA because it protects you from the outside entities that could interfere. So this business has done that because they're smart, they know how to work the system. And so nobody's going to touch that, which is very unfortunate. But again, this is information that the masses don't have this. Attorneys are not your friend. Their first allegiance is to the bar, the British accredited registry, then to the court, and a distant third is the client. Now, we're in America, right? So why is it the attorneys have to have a quote-unquote license, which is just a bar card, with the British accredited registry? What does the British have anything to do with the United States of America? You would think that makes it's a logical question, but again, that's another rabbit hole we can go down, which we're not going to go down today. But when you deem an attorney, when you take an attorney, you're deemed incompetent and a ward of the state. A ward of the state is a child or an incapacitated person placed under the legal custody of the state through a court order, which means you're not intelligent enough. You're looked at as just an infant mind. You can't handle your own affairs. That's what happens when you get an attorney. Now, they're not going to tell you this because if anybody gets into problems, if anybody wants to make a contract, if anybody wants to go into business with anybody else, typically an attorney's present. Somebody wants to sue, you got to get an attorney. The attorneys are a part of all the control of everything. They control it. If Bill Gates wants to go buy 70,000 acres, is he doing that himself or is his attorney doing that? If a doctor is being sued, who are they going to call? They're going to call their attorney. Everything's set up in a way that it keeps us just ignorant to what's really going on. And this goes on to the doctrine known as parens patriae, or the ruler's power to protect minors was viewed as a justification for governmental intervention into the parent-child relationship, either to enforce parental duty or to supply substitute care for the child. I have been pronounced here, father of the country. Where have we heard that before? Has anybody ever heard that before? Father of the state, father of the country. Well, look at Nazis' history, and it'll ring a bell there, because that was exactly what Hitler did. Our legal system is corrupted by the same evil that controls the media, nutrition, and medicine. In order to succeed, we must learn our rights and stand on them. Learn the foundation and creation of government by studying the United States Constitution and your state constitution. We, the people, have all of the power. All state actors can be held responsible civilly and criminally. Now, this is big right here, because if you look at law is so complex. The United States Code is so complex. Probate code, traffic code, civil code, bankruptcy code. Penal code. There's so much information that is just built on top of two foundational documents: the Constitution of the United States of America and your state constitution. That is the trust indenture that is established for we the people to control the government. Our rights are unalienable. Our rights are under God. We created government. The government created a process to control the government entities that are a part of it. That's the legal entity of the person. So I go into public office. I am a part of that cycle of rules that I have to abide by. Next one is we are above all state public officials, act in such a way, education is confidence. You are never obligated to speak to any CPS agent or officer. Big recommendation there, don't talk to anybody. You plead the fifth immediately. Don't talk to anybody. Don't give out any information voluntarily. anytime you're faced with a confrontation, call a local sheriff. They're going to bring the police officer, you bring the sheriff, because the sheriff is supposed to be the officer for the people. So you always bring the sheriff and you get the sheriff involved. Answer no questions, and if any agents threaten to enter your home or remove your offspring, demand a valid warrant to be provided. So all of this is great if you have this information in the beginning. But if you don't have this information and you get stuck in the traps of all of this, this is what you have to go through. This is the shit that you have to go through. And now, mind you, this is 6 months, this is 12 months, this is 18 months, this is 24 months, this is up to 120 days. Just because someone called CPS and said, oh, you have too many dishes dirty in your house is unsuitable for kids, so we'll take your kids. Just for that. And you don't get out of it immediately by standing on the ground and not allowing it to take place, you're going to have to go through all of this in order to get your kid back. It goes from the emergency response, the child removal, then you have the petition filed, which is a detention hearing, the initial hearing, then you have a jurisdiction and disposition hearing, which could be terminated to a family maintenance plan, and you have to go through that for 6 months, and then they'll dismiss your case, or they don't dismiss your case and it's bypassed to a 366 hearing, and each state is a little bit different, but this is California's, which is the parental termination rights hearing, and they'll literally rip your parental rights away from you if you don't have that strong foundation to know that and not let them ethically. If you don't, in my situation, I didn't have this information, I didn't have any support, I had to go through this alone. I have been fortunate enough to meet some guys that have been able to help me educate myself, and I got a fast track in education, but I was already so sunk in quicksand up to my hips that it was almost impossible for me to get out of it. But in this process, I have to reference back to the works of Aaron because of the fact that